Wigan Pier project, which traces all well steps around the north of the country, including into this great city of Liverpool. And we also run Britain Talks, which brings together Brexiteers and Remainers and people divided on other issues to kind of plot a way forward. So the Mirror's really proud to have launched a campaign last week with the NEU on universal free school meals for all primary school children. It was launched by my colleagues Jason Beattie and Lizzie Buchan, who's here, and it's been continued in the Real Britain column. The title of this fringe, as you'll know, is Hunger, a Political Choice? ? I think that question mark was probably removed on Friday by the budget, the millionaires' budget that we've seen. I'll use this one. Thank you. So I was saying that the title of today's fringe is Hunger, a Political Choice, but that question mark's been effectively removed on Friday by the millionaires' budget unveiled by the government. It's become very, very clear what the priorities are for that government. It's the most divisive budget, certainly of my lifetime, and I'm one of Thatcher's children. And it's left ordinary families quite literally out in the cold, and children at even greater risk of hunger and nutrition-related disease. So what are we going to do about it? Well, for a start, we've been going around listening to pupils who've been telling us about some of the difficulties that they've had in being kept fed. Last week, Rosie, pupil in Barnsley, told me about how she was seeing two divides in her school canteen. She said scarily large numbers of kids were buying crisps on the way in just to eat for lunch, or they were just bringing a small carton to have for their lunch. You might have seen stuff in the Observer this morning, really upsetting piece in the Observer, talking about how chefs in schools, a charity, were reporting children in Lewisham that were pretending to eat out of an empty lunchbox, kind of basically miming that they were eating so that others wouldn't know. They weren't eligible for free school meals. And they said, we're hearing about kids so hungry that they're eating rubbers in their lessons. So last week I also spoke to a young woman called Christina Adain, who was the young woman who inspired the Marcus Rashford free school meals campaign. She's an amazing young woman. She started a petition just kind of out of nowhere that grew suddenly to 500,000 signatures, and Marcus Rashford ended up getting on board. And she was telling me how she started the campaign when she was in year 11. She's now on a gap year before university, and saying, I cannot believe it's worse than when I started. It's so bleak and disturbing that we have to fight this hard. But she ended up saying, they have the money, let's use food to heal and bring people together. And that was the message that she wanted me to bring to the conference today. So all of the people on this panel, in different ways, are trying to use food to heal and bring people together. First of all, we were going to hear from an expert, Alison Garnham, from the who's led the Child Poverty Action Group since 2010, which was probably about the worst time to have taken over in child poverty, because it's been pretty much downhill ever since. So let's hear first from Alison. Thank you.
I'm really pleased to be here to support
Alison?
Sorry, Alison. Yeah.
Sorry. I'm delighted to be here to support this campaign, fully in support of the campaign to get universal primary free school meals. As has just been said, families with children have had a terrible decade. We saw over 50 cuts to benefits and freezes to benefits after 2012. We now spend 42 billion a year less on social security than we did back in 2010. 42 billion, breathe that one in, it's absolutely extraordinary. And child benefit, aiming to meet some of the costs of having children that other families don't have, has lost 30% of its value. So it's a really, we're in a very poor position as far as families with children are concerned who are on a low income. In Wales and Scotland, they are starting to roll out universal free school meals. So there's action being taken in parts of the UK that's not being taken in England. So that's something that's worth bearing in mind. Can be done. Personally, I've never understood the reason for charging for free school meals in the first place. Where on earth did this policy come from? I think it came out of pre-war voluntarism before schools became universal. But when we go into hospital, we get fed at meal times. It's part of the service. The same should be true in schools. That way we ensure nutrition in hospitals so people can get well, in schools so kids can learn. It's an essential part of a service. The schools and local authorities have already taken the step to make their free school meals universal, can see the enormous advantages of it. Lunchtime becomes an occasion where the school community comes together, everyone just sits down together, it improves educational attainment, teachers eat with kids, social events take place. Nowadays, children only qualify for free school meals if the family's income is below $7,400 a year. So that means it largely goes to families not in paid work. Eligibility for free school meals has been falling just as in-work poverty has been rising. This is assumed to be the result of people moving into work and getting better off, but in fact it creates a cliff edge because people can't afford to replace the lost free school meals with the earnings that they get because their earnings are so low. So it remains a really stigmatised residual entitlement and a very poor indicator of disadvantage in schools, actually. By our calculations, 800,000 children living in poverty in the UK are not entitled to free school meals. That's nearly a third of children in poverty, not entitled, even though they're actually in poverty. So it's become a pretty dysfunctional system. And this is at a time when nearly a third of children in the country live in poverty. Most of them live with working parents who don't qualify for free school meals. So child poverty in working families is getting bigger, but those families are not becoming entitled. So we support universal free school meals for all primary school children. For secondary schools, as a first step, we'd like to see eligibility extended again to all children on universal credit. That would make 1.3 million more children eligible for free school meals, the majority of those living in poverty. It would cost $550 million a year. Well, that's nothing considering what was being sprayed around on Friday, is it? Half of which went to the richest 5% and only 12% went to the bottom half of the population. Extraordinary. Ultimately, we'd like to see free school meals being universal for everybody. Let's be honest, extending it to all and making it finally universal would be expensive, but it's like ripping off a plaster. It would really be worth it. It won't end child poverty, but it will make a massive help for families with children to remove those costs and make the school experience much more equal. It'll put money back in the pockets of hard-up families. My ultimate point is, why means test the middle of the school day in a universal education system? It should be a properly universal service. Thank you.
It was a brilliant way of putting it at the end, Alison. Thank you very much. I'm going to introduce Kevin Courtney. Probably doesn't need much introduction to most people in this room. He's been the General Secretary of the NEU since 2016. He hails from Pontypridd. He began his teaching career in the physics department of Camden School for Girls. And he's just told me he's a relative of Tom Jones.
Yeah, no, Tom is my mum's cousin. Very excited. Free school meals, universal free school meals in primary schools is an idea whose time has come. And we are really pleased. We're not affiliated to the Labour Party. Some of us are individual members. We're not affiliated, but I must say I'm really pleased that Liverpool Riverside and the SCA put down an emergency motion on this for a discussion. We are really pleased, the NEU, to be here with the Daily Mirror, having launched this campaign last week, and alongside fantastic people on this platform today. Always good to be with the Child Poverty Action Group, working together with Ian, with Sarah, who's a fantastic NEU member, and with the other people who are going to be here. This campaign is being supported by the NASUWT, by Unison, by Sikh organisations, Muslim organisations, Christian organisations, by the Muslim Council of Britain. It has extraordinary wide support, and it matters. We are entering a moment of social crisis in this country. People are still going to face immiseration this winter, despite us managing to get the Conservatives to do something on energy costs. It's still twice as much as they were last year. We're still in the context of people not being able to afford to put the heating on. And in that situation, the question of childhood hunger comes more and more onto the front page, where it should be in the Daily Mirror. We're really pleased that that's happening. That moment of social crisis, it's triggered by events outside our government's control, by the war in Ukraine, by the way the world economies have opened up post-COVID. But the reason we're in this social crisis is not that trigger. It's what Alison talked about since 2010, the huge cuts in benefits since 2010, the huge cuts in take-home pay since 2010. So according to the TUC, the average worker has lost £20,000 real terms between 2010 and now. According to our calculations, teachers have lost 20% real terms, support staff in schools 27% real terms. And I'm not talking about our pay campaign here. I'm saying that if you put people in that position where benefits have gone down, where wages have gone down, then more and more people start to find it difficult to feed their children and have the heating on, and they are making very difficult choices. Now, child poverty is an absolute disgrace in our country, and it has gone up. It has gone up dramatically since 2010, when a government left office that had targets to reduce child poverty and was succeeding in them, and was succeeded by a government that got rid of targets on reducing child poverty. So it is a political question. Child poverty going up dramatically since 2010, and then new light thrown on it during the pandemic. When Marcus Rashford and, when we were all so concerned about children being hungry during those school holiday closures, during that period of lockdown, that's because they really were hungry on a mass scale. And the pandemic had done that. Our members, teachers, support staff in schools teaching children online, I tell you what, they had experiences they'd not had before of looking directly into the homes of children, because you see the home through the Zoom class, through the Teams classroom, and you see middle class families that are a bit better off, still in difficulty, and you see families that are in enormously difficult situations. I mean, actually, at the beginning, you certainly couldn't see into the most challenging rooms because those kids didn't have broadband and they didn't have equipment, but some of that got sorted out. And then you were seeing children changing house because the homeless, the routine homelessness and evictions. You see children sharing bedrooms with their parents who are working shifts, trying to be online. So new light thrown on poverty during the pandemic. Child poverty increasing dramatically during the pandemic, and now increasing dramatically again because of this period of social crisis. We need a change. We need a change for the children in this country. My union, the NEU, working with the Daily Mirror, we're trying to do this in a variety of different ways. During the pandemic, the union made a donation of £1 million to a Daily Mirror joint campaign that we did. And do you know what we used that £1 million for? To buy pens and paper for children at home who had no pens and paper at home. So we donated £1 million to that. We've been supporting Mike Amesbury MP in his campaign to get some control on the extortionate cost of free school of school uniforms. We want all children to have equipment, broadband at home, but now we say universal free school meals. The Wales Labour government, in conjunction with Plaid Cymru, are bringing it in. The SNP are bringing it in. England is falling way behind, and we demand this government, this Tory government, introduces free school meals. It would be a real help to people facing immiseration this autumn. We think this idea is an idea whose time has come. We hear the arguments against, so let me just run through them and then try and answer them. There's this argument that we're subsidising the wealthy, the argument that we're subsidising the middle class, the argument that schools don't have big enough kitchens, the argument that schools don't have big enough dining halls, the argument that it's too expensive. Well, just think about what Alison was talking about. To get free school meals at the moment, your income has to be less than 7,400. Those aren't poor people, those are ultra poor people that we're talking about there. there are 800,000 children in families that are poor who do not have any access to free school meals. 3/4 of those children have a parent in work. These are not workless people. These are people whose parents are working and they're still too poor to feed and put the light on, and they're still excluded from free school meals. So the very minimum is we need to increase free school meals to cover all of those people, everybody on universal credit. But then you think that more and more people are going to go into poverty in this autumn, and people will go in and out of poverty as well. You're in huge poverty when you're unemployed, you get a job, maybe there's a bit less poverty. And how do we keep track of that with children and make sure they're always fed every week? We can't do it through this means-tested method. We need universality. So the first argument is it's much more efficient for getting food into children's bellies. The argument that we're subsidising the wealthy, well, actually, the wealthy send their kids to private schools. And in private schools, the children all do sit down for a hot meal at lunchtime together as part of the educational experience. They say we're subsidising the middle classes. Actually, even the middle classes could do with a bit of a break on the cost of living at the moment, and their children deserve to be well fed. And we know from research that Child Poverty and others do that when you look at the packed lunches that children are bringing, about 1% of them are a nutritious meal. The others are not nutritious. So there's an argument from public health as well as an argument from efficiency for making sure that we have free school meals for all. And then when they say there's not enough kitchen space to cook meals for the children in schools, well, just stop and think about that. So these kids are in schools, and we can't make a hot meal for them, even if they're paying. This is an issue. It is true, and we'd have to invest in kitchens, phase to some extent, plan to bring it in, and that's what the Welsh Government's doing at the moment, and that's what this government should commit to do. Sometimes the dining rooms aren't big enough. We need to invest in that. It's fantastic if children can sit down together, have a meal together. It's not just feeding them then, it's also socialisation, it's also developing lots of other skills that go alongside it. We need this for our children. And when they say it's too expensive, I think Ros has already answered it. How dare you say it's too expensive when you've given all those billions to the most wealthy people in our country? We say absolutely not. We can afford it. We demand free school meals for all children in primary schools in this country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you so much. I'm going to introduce Ian Byrne. He's on pretty much home turf. He's the MP for Liverpool West Derby. He leads the Right to Food campaign in Parliament. He's a founder of Fans Supporting Food Banks, which works across the red and blue sides of the city. And he's a founder member of the Enough is Enough campaign. So this is quite a small room for him at the moment, I think. But yeah, over to you, Ian.
Thanks, Ros. Thanks for everyone organising this, and what a turnout, and so it should be, because this is one of the most important things I think that we face as a society. I was elected in 2019. Before then, I was a food activist fighting in my communities, and we formed Fans Supporting Food Banks, which, as Ros said, was Liverpudlians and Evertonians coming together to collect food, to put in pantries, to put in food banks, but always with a political element to it, which was the right to food. We shouldn't have to be doing this. We shouldn't have to be begging for scraps off the table. So when I got into Parliament, we devised the right to food, sat down with Shami Chakrabarti, with physicians, teachers, and we done Zoom calls across the country, and we said, what should the right to food look like? Overwhelmingly, one of the most important aspects of it was universal free school meals, because if the state gives us a statutory duty to put our children in school, then the state should have a statutory duty to ensure that every single child in this country can reach its full educational attainment and aspire to be something good, instead of falling asleep at tables and worrying that they can't concentrate because of hunger. This is where we are now, and it's only getting worse. So it's really, really important. It's a campaign really close to my heart, and I'm absolutely delighted that it's standing here today. There's a motion going through. Now, the Right to Food last year went through this conference like a dose of salt. Everybody voted for it. A key element is universal free school meals. Another key element is making sure that benefits actually pay. People don't have to use food banks when they're on benefits, which we all know. I've just been outside with the RCN. 3 nurses were telling me that there's nurses out there that can't afford to buy their own lunch because they're that poor at the moment. And then on top of that, finding money for their kids, for their school meals. This is an epidemic running through our country, and we've got a real opportunity now. The Right to Food campaign, as I said, universal free school meals is at its core. Just to let you know where we are with it now. Every trade union, TUC, signed up to it last year as in a motion. As I said, I went through this conference last year. We've got councils up and down the country: Liverpool, Manchester, Greater Manchester Combined Authority, Liverpool Combined Authority, Rotherham, Brighton, Haringey, St Helens, Preston, Lancaster, Durham, Newcastle, Portsmouth, Totes, Coventry, Sheffield, Birmingham, all wanting the right to food, all wanting universal free school meals. As Kevin said, the time has now come. The time really has now come. I sat in that chamber last Friday and I seen a new Prime Minister funnel 100 billion into the richest people in this country with not one mention of what she was going to do for the millions of kids that can't afford to eat in schools. 12 million people in this country going hungry at the moment. It's got to be challenged. Enough really is bloody enough. Last week, I met the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the right to food. He's wanting to come this country next year, so he'll be getting invited. Hopefully this campaign, the likes of Sadiq, people can call him over and let him talk about what a right to food look like. Next week, I'm going to the Vatican. Oh, I'm taking a message to the Vatican. What are they doing? Why aren't they behind this campaign? Surely to God, this is where they should be. So that's what we'll be doing. We've got to keep banging the door down. Because in my great city now in Liverpool, 1 in 3 are in food poverty. 1 in 3 in my great city are in poverty at the moment. It's only going to get worse with what we've seen on Friday, because no answers were forthcoming to my constituency of West Derby and my city, and I'm sure Sadiq could talk about London. I've just been collared outside. There's lots and lots of right to food. London activists, there's some in here now. It's sweeping the country because hunger really is a political choice. We've used it in Parliament many times because it is. I've sat down with ministers and I've said to them, I'm not here on a sectarian mission. I'm here on a humanitarian mission. Please listen to me. I'm telling you what's happening across the country, because fan support and food bank spreads from Cornwall to Scotland. All the feedback that we're getting, we know what's happening in our communities, and it's fell on deaf ears. And unfortunately, what we're now facing is probably even worse than went before, and I find that hard to say, but it is, you know, what we've seen. So it's really important that communities, unions, influential politicians, far more influential than me, are sitting here now and making demands, community groups coming together, because we've got to make such a noise that it's unanswerable. They've got to listen. So for me, where we are now, the Labour Party have got to step up to the plate with this as well. I've sat down with education ministers. I've said this is an absolute vote winner. If you put universal free school meals, if you were knocking on the doors as a Labour Party activist, well, what are you going to do for me? Well, I tell you what we're going to do for you. We're going to make sure that every single child in this school, in this country, is fed, watered, and can reach its full potential. And that's what we should be aiming for. And that's also Labour Party activists in here and members have got to be pushing for that as well. We've got to be letting the party know that these are the type of core demands that we demand, and that's what should be happening now. I'll just touch on something which is really close to my heart, because part of the right to food is community kitchens, and in 2 weeks' time, we're taking a school in my constituency, St Cecilia's, and at 5 o'clock, when the school shuts, we're taking the school over, working with the teachers, fan support and food banks, food for thought with the school dinner providers, and we're going to turn the school into a restaurant. We're calling it Scouse Kitchen, so you can replicate that across the country. And for an hour and a half, the kids can book a table with their extended families, and we can sit down, they can sit down in dignity, and they can sit together and eat together. And if they're hungry, that's the best way, we feel as though. So that's going to be a template backed by Liverpool City Council. We're going to do that from, I think, October the 10th. We're going to run that for a week, and hopefully that can be used as a template, because I know there's some brilliant work being done in London on this, and that's maybe something. It's a utilisation of schools, because lots of our community assets have been stripped away since 2010, but we still got schools and we still got kitchens, and maybe that's something which can be, as schools are key stakeholders, that we can actually utilise them. So I'm looking forward to doing that. Anyone wants to come up, they're more than welcome, they're invited. Hopefully Kevin, Ros, anyone that wants to come and see that. And I'll just finish on this now. I think where we are now as a country is one of the most dire states in living memory. And what we now need to be doing is getting off our knees, saying this system is broken, and we will not settle for it. We will not settle for millions of our children going hungry. We will not settle for it, because it does feel as though the will's not there to lift these children out of poverty and give them an opportunity, and that's really sinister, and that's really worrying. So what I'm saying to everybody in this room now is back this campaign, back the right to food, and let's demand better for our children and future generations.
Brilliant. Thank you to Ian, and I'm already looking forward to my invitation to Scouse Kitchen. It sounds absolutely brilliant. Thank you. Next, we're really lucky to have Sarah Kilpatrick, who's a teacher and NEU exec member, a secondary school art teacher from the North East, and you're coming really, from the front lines of this, so thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you very much. I've been asked to come here to speak to you about free school meals, about hungry children, about my perspective on this as a teacher, but while I'm more than happy to do that, I need everyone here to understand the scale of the crisis. I started teaching in 2006, working in a few different schools before settling into a permanent position in a secondary school in Gateshead. Is that not working? This one better?
Yeah.
Hey. I started teaching in 2006. I worked in a few different schools before I settled into a permanent position at a secondary school in Gateshead. It was a school like many others in the North East, the heart of its working class community. Several generations of each family attended, and very few pupils left the area on finishing their education. We offered a broad and balanced curriculum which served our cohort well. A mixture of academic and vocational, tailoring education to suit the needs of our learners, and working tirelessly to ensure that every child was given the opportunities that they needed to succeed. We were generously staffed with a loyal team of experienced colleagues who were known by the families we served and respected by even those pupils with the most challenging behaviour. And there was always challenging behaviour. An industrial area suffering from deprivation, generations of unemployment following the previous Tory government, but we had the tools at our disposal and we had the means to make appropriate choices on our curriculum offer. In 2010, a new government introduced the first in what would be an endless string of assaults on our schools, on my profession, on the public sector, and on the poor. The new progress measures made it impossible for us to continue our vocational provision. The proposed e-baccalaureate saw the arts sidelined in favour of greater rigour. Subjects began to disappear from the timetable. Budget cuts began to bite, and the first in what would become several rounds of redundancies saw the experienced staff all leave. Behavioural issues became more challenging, and as more and more colleagues left, the respect of the community dwindled as the parents of our pupils no longer recognised the staff. It became more difficult to recruit, and our maths department had to retrain colleagues from subjects which had been removed from the curriculum in order to fulfil their timetable. By 2017, the writing was on the wall, and we fell victim to the government's ideological assault on state schools with a forced academisation order. More redundancies followed. A restructure forced out the last of the remaining experienced staff and removed our head teacher. Our sixth form was closed down as it was not financially viable to offer post-16 education to our pupils. The school that I dedicated a decade of my career to was unrecognisable. I stuck it out through COVID and beyond, but this year, under mounting pressure both as the trade union representative and as what by then was termed by the Academy Trust a legacy member of staff, I knew that my position there was becoming untenable. I left the school I loved, the community I'd served. I left behind my pupils who my own sons refer to as Mammy's big children. I'm not telling you this to be self-indulgent or nostalgic. I'm telling you this because it's being repeated up and down the country. Over 36,000 teachers left the profession this year alone. Each one of those 36,000 was a name known to a group of children. Each one of those 36,000 knew the names, personalities, and circumstances of the children in their care. For so many children in this country, the staff working in their schools are one of the only sources of consistency in their lives. Yes, the children in our schools are hungry. Yes, free school meals should be provided to all children. And no, children can't learn when they're hungry. But they also can't learn when their teachers are burnt out and walking away from the classroom. They can't learn when there are no support staff left in schools because the budget has been spent on CEO pay. They can't learn when the curriculum has been narrowed down to this is what's going to be on the test, so learn it, otherwise we'll fail our Ofsted inspection. What happened to my school isn't unusual. There is a crisis in education in this country, the scale of which I'm not sure many politicians have grasped. As well as being condemned to cold homes this winter, as well as not having enough food to get them through the day, children in this country are being purposefully undereducated. Education in England in the 21st century has become the preserve of the wealthy. Those growing up in areas of deprivation have to settle for whichever profit-making academy trust wins the bid to take on their school from the funding-starved local authority forced to hand it over. I started high school in 1997, the year that Labour won an incredible victory and changed my life. I was one of those hungry children. The Labour government bought my school uniform, paid for me to stay on at sixth form, contributed the money to buy me a passport and sent me on my very first foreign trip with my A-level art class to Paris on a bus. I went on to study art history, returning to university to train as a teacher and go on to work with children in Gateshead who looked just like I did when I was their age. I joined the Labour Party when Gordon Brown was Prime Minister, and I proudly campaigned alongside so many others in 2017 and in 2019. My horror at learning that not everyone wanted us to win is hard to put into words. When you work with children suffering due to government policies which knowingly plunge them into poverty and deprivation, it is unfathomable that those saviours of my own naive adolescence would betray them in favour of factionalism. This country has never needed a new government more than it does right now. On behalf of my profession, my pupils and myself, I ask you to please remember that the next time we head into an election.
I think that's the best argument that I've heard for a Labour government in the whole day that I've been here, is to get a whole new generation of Sarahs coming through the ranks. So thank you. So our next speaker is Sadiq Khan. Sadiq's been very vocal. He's a Mayor of London, doesn't need much. He's my mayor. Mayor of London doesn't need much introduction, but has been very vocal on the subject of free school meals. And I think it was in your manifesto, wasn't it, this time round? So over to you.
Well, can I thank the Mirror and NEU for hosting this really important meeting. I've spoken over the years at many venues across the globe. It's my first ever plastic bubble, and so I want to thank the Mirror, no expense spared, for this fringe meeting. Can I just begin by saying this is personal? This is personal to me because I grew up on free school meals, and it was a lifeline for families like mine. That being said, my dad hated filling in the long forms you had to fill in to be eligible for free school meals, and I hated being in that queue where you got the free school meal tokens. I still remember, and I'm embarrassed of saying this, but the shame and stigma being in that queue, getting your token for a free school meal. When I think about some of the stories we've heard, not just from Ian, Sarah and Kevin, but the stories I hear from members of my family who are teachers now, what I find staggering is that children today are worse off than children when Margaret Thatcher was the Prime Minister. And the reason why this campaign is so important is this autumn, this winter, things are going to get even worse. And I see this, what this really boils down to, and Ian was spot on, is what sort of society do we want to live in? Do we want to live in a society where we feed children or lift the caps on bonuses bankers receive? Do we want to live in a society where we feed children or allow energy companies to make even more profits? Do we want to live in a society where we feed children or give tax cuts to the top 1%? And when I hear stories about friends of mine who are teachers, members of the NEU, teachers, assistants, support staff, taking toasters to work, buying loaves of bread with their own money to feed their children as well as teaching them during the course of a day, it begs the question, what sort of society do we live in? And I want to thank Mark Drakeford and the Welsh Labour government for the steps they are making. If Wales can do it, why can't the rest of us? I want to thank all those Labour councils in London, from Tower Hamlets to Southwark, from Islington to Newham. If some Labour councils in London can do it, why can't all councils across the country? That's why it is so important that we campaign, because, you know, we've shown we can force the government to do U-turns. We saw the campaign. It wasn't just led by Marcus Rashford. It was a campaign of good journalists, good trade unions, good politicians, good people who work in schools, decent people lobbying their MPs and lobbying the government to make a difference. But I tell you this, we've got a generation of young people growing up hungry. We've got a generation of their parents skipping a meal themselves so their kids can eat a meal. And you've got children not looking forward to holidays, because in the holidays they eat less than during the school term, because they're eligible for free school meals during the school term and not during the holidays. That's why the campaign actually is very simple. Universal free school meals to every primary school child. It's really important that we keep the ask simple, but also it's really important we campaign. Look, this time last year we had a different Prime Minister. We remember him. One of the things about Boris Johnson, now that he's a backbencher, it's something that he's avoided his entire adult life. He now is forced to spend more time with his families. But the thing about Liz Truss has said she is willing to lead an unpopular government. Well, I've got news for her, that ship has sailed. The key thing we've got to do is to lobby this government to make sure they do right over the course of the next few weeks and months, but make sure in our manifesto before the general election, we have that pledge, we have that promise, a universal right to free school meals for every primary school child. And at the same time, where Labour leaders are doing the right thing in the face of austerity, let's applaud them. Whether it's Wales, whether it's London, whether it's other parts of the country. Let's make sure we work incredibly hard this week to show the country we're fit to govern. We work incredibly hard over the course of the next few weeks and months to make sure when there is a general election, they return a Labour government with Keir Starmer in number 10 Downing Street and a Labour manifesto promising to deliver on free school meals. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much to Sadiq, and I know that my colleague Jason Beattie wrote a piece last week about Southwark and how